tier one, great cathedral of knowledge and legitimation of the system. Let's say Harvard. And you ask them, explain the economic crisis that we're now in. You know, they have difficulty explaining it. Go to an economics class, an economics professor. So the first thing, they're going to give you a textbook on microeconomics. I won't even explain what that is. And you say, but professor, we're studying a theory that goes back to the 1880s, 1890s, about the way the economy should work and the way markets should work, but could you use that theory to explain the current economic crisis? And after a lot of back and forth, they would have to admit no. Okay? Because what we call standard economic models, or if you want, bourgeois economics, do not have a theory of crisis. In other words, economic theories that are taught in universities, I don't care whether it's liberal bourgeois economics or conservative bourgeois economics or libertarian bourgeois economics, they believe that the crises that capitalist economies experience are at best temporary. And if we technically understand the economy, we can devise technical means of resolving these crises. I don't give a damn whether it's what they call fiscal policy, meaning, for example, the government spending money to stimulate the economy, or monetary means by which the Federal Reserve does certain things, or the Treasury prints money, or whatever. It's all about technical ways of massaging and solving problems in the economy. Radical economists, who you don't hear, you're not going to see on the television, they're not taught in the classrooms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, begin with the idea that first of all you have to look at the economy holistically. And here we talk about a method of analysis that approaches things from totalities. I want to use the word totalities, the total system, not just its parts. Okay? Not just its parts. If you recall, for several weeks now, we have talked about dialectical logic and how it differs from what we call formal logic, that is the logic of identity. Another way to talk about that logic is the logic of parts. See? That is why American social science, American social thinking begins and ends with the individual. Okay? The best that bourgeois economist, let me step back, I just want to tell you what I mean. When I say bourgeois economist, I mean a couple of things. First of all, an economist, a social thinker, a sociologist, who thinks in terms of preserving the system as it is. Okay? We call this a system of bourgeois dominance. That is the capitalist class. Now we're going to talk about how that class has evolved over time. But almost any textbook, any class, any professor in a university in America, and especially if she or he has tenure, and especially if she or he is a full professor, by that time they've almost completely sold out. There's nothing left to them. Because they have based their careers on apologizing for the system as it exists, or devising ways to rework and uphold the system as it exists. Okay? That's what I mean, bourgeois economics. It is the economics of those thinkers who are committed to apologizing for, defending, or fixing, if that's possible, the system as it exists. Which means all of the inequalities. Bourgeois social science, in the face of poverty, homelessness, crisis, ultimately has to blame the victim. Right. Has to. Now, if there is poverty, well, one thing they try to do, and I'm a little bit off of the economic, but I'll get back. One thing they do is devise a theory of the deserving and the undeserving poor. But in a racist society, the undeserving poor are always black folk and other people of color, but essentially black folk. So you see black folk in jail, you see black folk begging, you see black people homeless, you see black people in despair. Well, it's because you all are at fault. And a whole industry of social science. So the very gentle and genteel and nice and liberal bourgeois professor that you think liked you so much, when it comes to worldview and theory and ideology, that individual is more than not dedicated to an intellectual and research project to keep your butt down. Mm-hmm. They are thus active participants through ideology in the oppression of the oppressed. That is what we call bourgeois social science. And in universities like this, and especially at a time like this, there is very little a give and take, debate over these fundamental questions. So we, as I think we made clear here, who proceed from a different logic, who first of all do not begin with the individual, but begin with the whole and look at the way the parts interact within the whole. In other words, the poor black person is not an individual who made mistakes. The poor black person is an individual who has existed in a long historic continuum of American racism and exploitation. This is what we call dialectical logic. And if you want, at this point, I guess my best definition of dialectical logic, you might want to write this down. It is the logic of totalities. It is the logic of the whole, rather than of its parts. Now, we can get into a lot of things. I just want to parenthetically say, we can get into a lot of philosophical debates, which I welcome, I'm prepared to address, about, well, what about the individual? You see what I'm saying? You know, and what about the psychoanalytic or the phenomenological things that we kind of threw out last time? These are all very important things. And you know, we can go back and forth on this. But I can tell you this. Every method in logic and social science or economics that begins and ends with the individual, first of all, is and must be non-historical, or what we call ahistorical. Has to be. Okay? The second thing is that it cannot be committed to looking at the whole. In other words, example, we are going, as we go through this, talk about what we call a systemic crisis. A crisis of the system. We're going to use another word, systemic breakdown. A breakdown and unraveling of the system. Okay? These concepts, you can read the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, the New York Times, you can listen to CNBC, you can, go to every college class and you're trying to learn business because you want to set up your business and all that type of thing. You will know nothing about the economy, especially when it hits a crisis of this magnitude. Okay? We want to start with the whole, the system itself. Therefore, we're talking about a mode of production, which includes the economy. But the economy does not function on its own. It operates within the framework of the state. If you wish, the regime. Here we're not talking about just Obama or just Kennedy or just any single person. We're talking about the regime. When we say the regime, you might wish to write this down. The system of the dispensation and consolidation of power.